We are currently standing at the W.E.B. Du Bois boyhood site here in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. When you come here, you walk these woods and you learn about Du Bois through the waysides that we have at these various stops here. And you actually get to stand on the site of the home that Du Bois lived in from age 2 to age 6.
His family, the Burgards, had owned land on the Egremont Plain for more than 150 years. And I know that for Du Bois, that was a big deal that African Americans actually owned land, because you always hear, the narrative of African Americans being enslaved and sharecropping and not owning land. But Du Bois came from like a totally different place, a place where he could attend school with white people, where he could, go literally a mile down the road and be next to his grandfather's brothers and all of his cousins. So for him, this was home.
As Du Bois says, this was the first home that he remembers. We talk about the fact that Du Bois wants to come back and reclaim this place later in life, which he gets as a pretty awesome birthday present for his 60th birthday.
Some of his friends actually purchased the house for him because clearly he talked about it a lot to his NAACP friends.
And he got all excited. He came to Great Barrington, he made an appointment with the area's leading architect from Pittsfield, and they started to draw plans how to fix over the old house to become a summer retreat for Du Bois.
Even though he didn't really live here for a long period of his life, he leaves in 1885 to go to Fisk. He comes back and he brings his first and second wife here to look at the property. He buries his children here. Both of his children are born here and they're buried in Mahawi Cemetery. So even though Du Bois doesn't live here for a long time, he actually really loves this place, and this is considered his home.
Building a home on the site was important. African Americans being able to own their land and to be able to have something that belongs to them that no one can take from them. It's a sense of independence, it's a sense of freedom.
Unfortunately, the recession set in. He became involved with other things, and he never managed to do much more than put up a new chimney at the house.
Being unable to keep up and being unable to financially complete the project, he left the project undone. Unfortunately, he was only able to start on the fireplace, and unfortunately that's the only remnant that we have here at the site.
And years went by and the house kind of fell into ruin, and he had to sell it in the early 1950s. And that was a sad time for him, because he would have so enjoyed coming back to the Berkshires, to his old Great Barrington, just to, for relief and for pleasure. He still had family here, cousins.
The collapse of the capitalist system after the First World War brought poverty, unemployment, and distress worse than America had ever seen. There was still a chance for some to rise and get rich, but the working classes were no longer generally able to buy land. Their wages did not amount to what they in reality earned, and those handicapped by race prejudice had small chance to overcome poverty and ignorance and disease.
W.E.B. Du Bois runs for the U.S. Senate in Harlem in 1950. Unfortunately, he lost the election, but I think it further emboldened his ideas on his blueprint on what he feels that democracy and human rights should look like. He wanted to try to go the legislative route of trying to ensure change for disenfranchised individuals.
I look again upon the scene. The legal fight led by the NAACP has been an astonishing success. But its very success shows the limitations of law and law enforcement unless this program has an economic foundation. Unless the mass of Negro people have not simply legal rights, but have such rights to work and wage that enable them to live decently.
He knows what it's about to be a part of democracy. I mean, he supports things like women's rights and suffragette issues. I think that those ideas were generated here in Great Barrington. He sits in on town council meetings. There's even evidence in the quote that's on the sign. Democracy is a part of progress. Du Bois, around the 1950s, declared his support of the Communist Party, which in this post-McCarthy era was seen as a terrible idea.
Democracy has so disappeared in the United States that there are some subjects that cannot even be discussed. The essence of the democratic process is free discussion. There was a time when men were not allowed to talk about universal suffrage, or the education of women, or freedom for Negro slaves. Today, communism is the dirty word, and socialism is suspect.
There's that idea of being a man on the verge of exile. As early as 1900, we have what modern day terms would be considered Arab Spring, but you had these countries in Africa that are developing their own independence. They're establishing their independence from their colonial oppressors. And Du Bois gets an offer to write the Encyclopedia Africana because he feels that a nation's story is important to its identity. He gets the invitation from President Nkrumah and goes to Ghana. And unfortunately, that's where the story of Du Bois ends. He dies at the age of 95 in August of 1963, the day before the March on Washington.
So even though he's buried in Ghana, on his tombstone it actually shows, or it says that he's from Great Barrington. So for him, this is always home. So I think it's real when you say that he idealized or romanticized the place, but maybe he needed that in order to, do all of his work in civil rights.
We're here at the actual home site, the site that Du Bois talks about, that he remembers being the first house that he remembers. This is the place where he wanted to rebuild. I tell people it's kind of a physical metaphor of the work of civil rights. That's work that still needs to be done. Du Bois was the foundation. It's now up to those of us who are here and who appreciate it to continue to build on that foundation and do the work.
This area, this is where Du Bois was born. This is where he spent his childhood.
I often refer to my education in the little New England town where I was born. There I learned my lesson in democracy. Listen to the other side.
Du Bois left Great Barrington to become an influential scholar, educator, organizer, and a champion of national and international human rights. We always learn about the founding fathers. We learn about, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. We learn about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when we learn about the Civil Rights Movement. But we should also learn about Du Bois.
W.E.B. Du Bois, in many ways, was the intellectual leader of the Civil Rights Movement.
I was pretty radical in some things I said. I made a good many enemies.
He's, one of the premier intellectuals of the 20th century.
What is life but the attempt of human beings to be happy and contented in a world which with all its ill has a mass of sun and waters, of trees and flowers, of beauty and love. We want to know what this world is, how its wonderful laws act, who its peoples are, and how they think and act, and how what they have done in years and ages past may guide us today.